All right, I've had a good night's sleep. I've been chewing on it, trying to think about it throughout last night and this morning. And this is part of why color is so confusing, is because it feels very subjective, it feels very relative, and it is very relative. And so when we're talking about color temperature like warm and cool, there are like generally accepted areas that are like cool and warm, right? So like in this example, over here is generally cooler colors. Over here is generally warm colors. However, all of this is in relationship. So if you have, this red compared to this red is warmer because it's closer to the yellow and it has some yellow in it. This red is cooler because it has some blue in it. However, if you compare ultramarine and alizarin, well, now you go, well, now it's a warm color compared to this one, right? So it can feel a little tricky in terms of thinking about warm and cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little exercise where I want you to just not think about warm and cool for a minute. And I want you to just think instead for now about what is in each color, right? So when we were talking about primary colors, secondary colors, and tertiary colors, now pigments, it's tricky because a pure pigment can have a little bit of a whole bunch of things in it. But just the best you can, you're going to try to think of what has what in it. So, like this cad yellow has a little bit of red in it. The lemon yellow has a little bit of green in it. So then when you mix cad red with alizarin crimson, which has blue in it, now you're actually mixing 3 colors together, which is going to make it more muted and more neutral. In this center is kind of like the neutral zone, where it's like if you have, an even amount of each one, you kind of have black or gray in the middle here, right? And so once you start, if you're mixing just 2 colors together, they kind of go far out here on the outside. So if you've got your ultramarine and your alizarin crimson, they're just going to be all the way out on the outside of the circle. So you get this nice, pure, clean color. But the second you introduce a little bit of yellow, it moves into the center towards neutral, because now you've got a little bit of yellow. Now it's a tertiary color. So everything in the center here is a tertiary color, because it's going to have a little bit of something else in it, a third color in it. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to do an exercise. Again, we're going to do a color wheel, but I'm going to have you do a slightly more thorough color wheel than I usually do. Okay, I had to quick redraw my circle. If you want to, I took a 5-inch circle, about 4 1/4 out from each point. Gets me pretty close to an evenly split circle, and then the center is about 2 1/2 from each point on in. So that at least gets you a pretty nice circle. Now we're going to start with doing some, I've activated my paints so they're nice and easy to pull up, and I get nice saturated colors. These are also Daniel Smith's, and so they are just going to, you'll notice mine might be a little bit more saturated. They just lift and pull up really easily and really well from the palette. So I'm going to start with that cad red. Now this has a little bit of yellow in it, so it's on this side. I'm going to put the yellows here, blues here. Now I'm going to add my alizarin crimson next to that, which is right here. And you'll notice I have my clean water. I have my clean water further away and harder to get to. So in terms of, when we were talking about figuring out your setup and what works for you, I have to actually physically make my clean water harder to get to so that I don't accidentally dip it in. Now my cad red is a little less orange than the one that they have at the studio. I think the one at the studio is a cad red light, and this is a cad red medium, but you can still at least see this has a little bit of blue in it, This has a little bit of yellow in it. It's not as stark of a difference as what you'll notice in the studio, but it is enough for, and my lighting is not the best, but it'll at least work for what we have right now. So next I'm gonna do the ultramarine blue, and I don't have cerulean on my palette, but I'm gonna kind of do the alternative. So just think about this one as cerulean. So let's go grab my, I'm gonna lift this out so you can see a little bit easier even how I am grabbing my paint. Kind of testing it out here. So this blue has some red in it, which is why I have it on this side. All right, next I'm gonna go on the other side here and grab, this is kind of, whoops, that was the wrong one. Dirt, dirt, dirt. I'm gonna grab the equivalent of the cerulean for what I have. I think mine is a little more of like a, I mean, this might be a phthalo. I don't think it is. I actually can't remember which pigment this is right now, or what the name of this one is. So if you can see these two, this one leans more green, this one leans more purple. I'm actually gonna lift a little bit more of that water up. I wanna see a little more of the paper so that I can see the color a little bit easier and see the differences a little bit easier. All right, next, oh, my lemon yellow is a little dirty, so I'm gonna clean that out a minute, grab some clean water. All right, that's better. And I mean, I can tell that my paintbrush has too much water in it, so I'm just gonna scrape it off, and you see how it's dripping down the side? If it's dripping down the side, I probably have too much water, so that's kind of one of the ways that I manage my water. If I go too wet, it's gonna create a puddle, and I just don't want that. I want it to be nice and crisp, and it'll also create pockets and things like that, which again, they're fine, but when you're trying to get an even amount across the board, a nice even wash, don't want to deal with that. So all right, now I'm going to do that cad yellow. So that was my lemon yellow, which has a little blue, my cad yellow, and this cad yellow is quite orange for a yellow. So you can see the difference between these two is a lot stronger, right? Not quite as distinct over here, but if you were to do this with your own palette, you'll probably have much clearer distinction between the two. All right, so now when I'm mixing this cad yellow and this cad red, they are going to relate really well together because they're very close to each other. So I'm going to get a really pure color. It's not going to have any blue in it at all. So I'm going to take a little bit of my cad yellow. I'm going to take some of my cad red. And when we were talking about, you'll notice, I don't know if you could tell, so I grabbed a very small amount of red and it's already this orange. So this is part of when you were asking the question about kind of how do you know if you have 80% or 60% or whatever. The part that's tricky is that different pigments are more intense and less intense. And so it's not necessarily grabbing a perfectly even amount of like 50% of this pigment and this pigment because this cad red is so much more intense than the cad yellow. So then if I were to go and do the alizarin crimson and the, lemon yellow, again, the way that how intense they are is going to be different, which makes it really hard to create like a rule of thumb for exactly how much paint to grab for each one. So this is why it's just really important that you practice and mix it yourself. I mean, I can give you some general ideas of, hey guys, these, reds tend to be more intense, than whatever other one, but even then, it's just going to be better if you get your own feeling for it, because then you will learn yourself what it is. So this is this to me looks like a fairly middle ground between the two. Now I'm going to do the same thing with the lemon yellow. I'm going to grab some clean water for this one just because I don't want anything muddying it up. So I'm going to grab my lemon yellow and I'm going to mix it with my cerulean. So grab a little bit of cerulean. Now, this isn't actually cerulean. This is like, again, I can't remember which one it is, but this one is really intense, probably even more so than the Cad Red. And so I really have to grab a lot more yellow to get it to feel like it's an even middle ground of the two. It feels pretty good. Probably still leaning a little bit heavier. I'm just going to add a little more yellow. Rinse out a little bit of pigment, add a little more yellow. I'm going to lift a little bit of that off again, just so that I can see that color nice and clear. All right, and then I'm going to take my ultramarine and my alizarin. Now again, because these colors are close to each other in the color wheel, they relate really, really well. And so you get these really pure, clean looking colors. So when you are making a landscape or doing I need a little bit more water. And so I just dipped it in the water, but then I just scraped it off because I don't want it to pool. But I need a little bit less pigment in order for it to show the color really nice and clear. Oh shoot, just rinsed in my clean water. There we go. All right, so these colors on the outside are going to be your secondary colors. These are going to be the more pure versions of the color. This is where I want you to think about, instead of warm and cool, I want you to think about what's in each one of these pigments to figure out kind of what it's going to do. Let's say I'm trying to mix a nice landscape and I mix this yellow, this bluish greenish yellow with a greenish blue, right? I'm going to get this very intense, pure green. However, if I'm looking at a landscape that's got like a real muddy, really rich, deep, dark looking green, that means that I need to introduce a red somewhere. Now you can do that straight by mixing, you know, this lemon yellow with that cerulean blue, and then you can take a little bit of that Cad Red, grab a tiny bit more, and it's going to neutralize it a bit. So let's go in here. It really doesn't have very much Cad Red in it, so I'm going to add just a tiny bit more. All right, so now this is not a secondary color. This is now a tertiary color. So you're going to get a more muted and toned down green, right? The further you go in with the more red, the more brown you're going to get, right? So if I keep adding a little bit more and a little bit more of that red, I'm going to get more and more brown. Actually, this is probably technically more on this side of the wheel now because I've got quite a bit more red than green. Okay, so the more and more it gets in towards here, the more neutral it gets. So if I'm wanting to mix, like, or try to figure out where burnt sienna is on this color wheel, I'm trying to figure out kind of what is inside of burnt sienna. So this is a pure burnt sienna here. I'm going to do it off to the side so that you can kind of see. Too wet. So that you can kind of see what it looks like. So that's a pure burnt sienna, right? If I'm looking at that, I mean, it probably has, it looks like it relates to this cad red. So it's probably got some cad red in it. But it looks like it's got maybe a little bit of blue. But if I go cad red and straight blue, that's just going to give me purple. So I need a little bit of yellow in it. So I'm going to try doing a little bit of lemon yellow in there, and let's see if it can get close. And it takes a little while. You might be looking at this going, oh my gosh, how is she able to figure out so quickly what is in a color? Well, just because I have played around with it a lot and experimented a lot. So I'm taking that cad red, I'm adding a little bit of that cerulean blue or phthalo blue. And then I'm going to add a little bit of that lemon yellow. Let's see where that gets me. Pretty close. That's definitely a little more blue, right? So I'm going to try adding a little bit more cad red and a little bit more yellow. Let's see if that's starting to, yep, a little more. That lemon yellow takes a little bit to really take. Now we're getting close. Oh, sorry, you couldn't really see. All right, so now we're getting a lot closer. I'm going to keep going with that yellow. See where that puts me. A little more red. Oh, there we go. That is pretty darn close. So really, like, burnt sienna might have some of that. It might have some of the greenish yellow in it, the purplish blue, and the yellowish red. But if I want to get it exact, I might play around a little bit and go, all right, what if I do, you know, these two, like the yellowish red with the reddish yellow, and just introduce a little bit of ultramarine. And this is where color temperature comes in, like to cool it off. Maybe that'll get me a much closer match. Now we're already pretty close, but again, when you're painting, getting those colors to be spot on can make a huge difference. All right, so I've got a little too wet, but let's try. A little more red. To be able to see. That's closer. All right, so you can see, like, these are all browns, right? But this is going to help you, like, playing around with, especially for any of those secondary or tertiary colors, playing around with like what's inside of them before you start mixing with them is going to help you figure out what is going to blend and work well together and what's going to play well together, right? So when you have colors that are like closer to each other on the color wheel, they're more harmonious, they're more clean, bright, vibrant, and crisp. And then when you start kind of pulling more towards the middle, you end up with more muted colors. So if I mix for this dead center, if I mix, you know, all of my colors together, like a little bit of that lemon yellow, a little bit of the cad yellow, I'm going to go a little bit of the ultramarine, a little bit of the alizarin, more of that one, and then a little bit of cad red. Let's go with some phthalo blue. I'm gonna pull in a little more. All right, so when I mix a little bit of everything, I'm scraping it off so that I can hopefully see the actual color. I'm gonna get this neutral black. So now if I add, so that's a little bit of everything. So if I go heavier in the blue, it's gonna give me that color. If I go heavier with the red, it's gonna give me, let's go here, more of like a brown. I'm gonna thin that out a little bit so you can see the color. And if I go heavier on the yellow, it's gonna give me a little different, a little bit of a different color. Okay, so I hope this helps. I'm gonna now, take a minute and go through and like kind of fill in the rest of these and label these and everything, and I'll post a picture of it. But then when I'm trying to like figure out a nice rich green, I might go, I want like a neutral green, so I might intentionally start with this more reddish blue and mix it with the greenish yellow. So let's go, this is that ultramarine. Wow, that is an intense one. Ultramarine with a lemon yellow. So that'll kind of be like somewhere here on that wheel. I'm gonna get that kind of color. I know my lighting's not great. I'll post a picture of it so that hopefully you can see it a little bit better, but can you see? That's like a nice rich neutral green. If I add a little bit of that red to it now, that's actually probably what's gonna take that spot, but I'm gonna get even more neutral of a green. Okay, so I hope that this helps now when you're thinking about color mixing and you're trying to figure out how to mix in a way that things play well together, do what you want them to do. It's just gonna take a little bit of experimenting with how do you get the greens that you want. And so off to the side here, you can play around with trying to find neutral greens versus, more vibrant and intense greens, right? And this is going to help you much quicker be able to identify when you're working on a painting, how to create the green that you're looking for. And you can even just drop in like little drops on the outside and see how those blend and mix. But this is why experimenting on your own with color in particular is really important, so that you can figure out what is inside each of the colors and how they're going to mix together. Okay, I've now filled in all of these gaps and I've identified and labeled each of the colors. So when we're talking about color temperature now, I want to connect everything all together. This area over here is generally considered your cool color, right? Over here is generally considered your warm color, maybe your coolest and your warmest color. That means that as you move this way around the color wheel, you're moving towards cooler colors, cooler temperatures. So, this cad red is warmer, this alizarin crimson gets cooler than that. If it goes this way, it's also getting cooler, right? Because it's still moving towards the blues, which is your cool color. If we're on the cool side and we're moving this way around the wheel, we are getting warmer. And we're going this way, we are also getting warmer. So this is why sometimes it gets tricky when we go, wait a minute, is, this, purple here, is it considered warmer or cooler than this shade of green here? Well, that's tricky because they're kind of both heading in the same, they're around the same spot, heading towards warmer. So once you start like trying to compare these colors across from each other, it gets a little bit trickier. But I hope that this at least helps you understand when we're talking about warm and cool and we're talking about the shades. If you're looking at starting with what all is actually inside of each of the colors that you're working with, to help you better understand what's going to relate to each other. And then if you're working on a painting where you're kind of going, all right, I want cool shadows and I want warm highlights or warm lights. That means then, you know, maybe over here, maybe you'll have a really thin wash of kind of this like orangish tone. And maybe your shadows will have really dark, rich blues in it, right? So this gets really helpful as this starts to become a little more intuitive. That's when the warm and the cool starts to really step into play, and can really dramatically change the quality of your painting. So if you can, and if you have paints at home, try to create a color wheel like this, and just kind of divide out this little line here to help you be able to see and discern where colors fall within this wheel. Happy painting!